Hey there, welcome to the next lesson in my course on creating 5-year financial models in Excel. If you haven't seen the previous videos, you can find links to them in the description below. And if you want to download the Excel files and follow along, you can do so on the first link in the description below. Now let's get back to Excel. A lot of people believe that in order to be able to do complex, dynamically updated models, you need to know a lot of Excel formulas and some pretty specific and complex ones. And this is rarely the case. As you can see here, I'm even starting with the sum formula, and it's a really important one, and it's probably the source of most errors that you see in models. I do a lot of model audits, and the most common mistake is a sum formula that doesn't extend to the end of the data it's supposed to be summing, or a sum formula that's just dragged wrong, something's fixed or not fixed in terms of references, and this messes up the whole model. In our model, we're going to use a few formulas, and I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because most of them are really basic, and I'm pretty sure that probably most of you already know them, but still stick with me to the end of this lecture because I want to take a look at a few more complex concepts that we're going to rely on to build our dynamic model. Obviously, the sum formula is quite simple. Sum, tap to complete the formula, and then you can just use the arrows and hold shift to select what we want, or you can just drag and select what you want. And something that you might not know, there's a shortcut. If you press Alt and then hit equals, it's going to automatically populate a sum formula for you. Obviously, this only works where it's easy for Excel to figure out what you're trying to add up. Moving on, average is a formula that we're going to use quite a lot, especially when we're figuring out percentages going forward. So let's say we have sales growth. We might want to use for our modeling the average sales growth from the past years. And something else that we usually do is we work a lot with moving averages while modeling. So what I mean by moving average is that, let's say here, we're going to say budget 2022, and then we'll have budget 2023 and budget 2024. Let me just copy the formatting of those. Let's say we want to work with a moving average of 3. So we just grab the previous 3 periods, and then we copy this to the side. That's the moving average. So the budget for 22 will take the average of the last 3 years. The budget for 23 will take the average of the 2 historical years plus the average of the 2022 budget, and so on and so forth. We're going to rely quite a lot on the if formula, but in its more basic functionality. So what we might do is for tax, we might say that if our profit is above 0, then give me the profit multiplied by the tax, otherwise give me 0. And once we copy this down, you see that now we don't have any tax here because we're running at a loss. And this is also quite a common mistake. People almost expect companies to always be on profit. So a lot of times people will just do this, copy it down, not notice that you have an issue here, and this will flow through the cash flow statement and everything, and it's going to mess up your model. Something more financial in terms of formulas that we're going to be using is the payment, principal payment, and interest payment formulas, because we'll be dealing with debt that need to be repaid. We'll be building quite a few repayment schedules. So let's say how we use those formulas. The PMT formula is the total payment. Here, we need to grab the rate, which is our interest rate. I'm going to fix that with F4. Then we need the number of periods, 3, again, fix with F4. And then the present value, the 150, again, fixed with F4. You don't need to worry about the other 2 arguments, the future value or the type. And this is our payment for each year. Then we can also use the PPMT formula to calculate the principal repayment. So how much of this is principal? Again, the rate, fix it with F4. the period, this is the current period, and I'm not going to fix that because I wanted to move the reference as I copy the formula down. Then the number of periods, 3, again fix it with F4, and then the present value, again fix it with F4. Copy that down, just format it. This is the amount of principal we'll be repaying, and you notice that it grows, and this is typical in such a repayment schedule because we're paying the same amount each year, but every time we have less interest to pay because our outstanding principal has decreased, so a bigger portion of our payment goes towards principal repayment. Similarly, IPMT will give us the interest payment. Again, it wants the rate, fix it with F4, wants the current period, the total number of periods, and the present value. Copy it down, and you see that as the principal portion grows, the interest portion decreases. And then our principal closing balance, and this is another mistake I see often. A lot of people just do principal plus payment, and that's wrong because interest does not decrease your principal balance. So this should be principal opening balance plus the principal payment. Copy this down, and of course we need to link the principal opening balance for the next 2 periods, and the best check to see that we work correctly is that at the end of the periods, principal closing balance is 0. Okay, now over to the fun stuff. So there are 2 ways to do dropdowns in Excel. One is to use the data validation tool. If you go to data validation, and pick a list, you can either select options here, or you can also just list them. And then you get the drop down that you can check. But especially when it comes to more visual stuff, meaning like options for a potential stakeholder that's using the model, I prefer to just go to the developer tab, go to insert, and just select a combo box form control, which I can then drag and put anywhere. And then can just right click, format control, and on the control tab, you get the input range, and I want the input range to be those 2 options. And then you get the cell link. This is where the result will live. It's gonna live here, and select it. And because I only have 2 options, I'm gonna switch that to 2 drop-down lines. Hit OK, and now you see we have nothing selected, and this immediately changed to 0. Actually, the reason I prefer using the combo box instead of simple drop-down is because it always gives the result as a number. So we have 2 options. The first one gives me 1, and the second one gives me 2. And that's really convenient when we want to use a switch formula or a choose formula. Those 2 achieve the same thing. The only difference is that the switch formula is available in Office 365 and Excel 2019 and later. If you're using an earlier version of Excel, you can use the choose formula instead. They give the same results in terms of functionality. The only difference is that if you start working with huge data sets, then the choose formula performs a little worse. It gets slower. Meaning that if you have a really complex model and everything in terms of selecting scenarios is built on the choose formula, you might get like a 1 or 2 second refresh time when you switch between the 2, which is not such of a big deal because this is not something that you constantly switch. The way both formulas work is switch, tap, you get an expression. This can be a formula or a cell. So I'm just gonna link it to our selected value. And now we get to list the values and the result they correspond to. So here, what we'll say is if it's 1, give me the budget amount. And if it's 2, give me the actual amount. And that's it. Now, as soon as we switch this to actual, it updates the selected value here, and our number here is also updated. Choose works pretty much the same way. The only difference is that you don't list the values yourself. So you have an index number, and then you just list the values. So the first one is budget, and the second one is actual. In terms of ways to use it, the major difference is that if, let's say, we had a drop down here, say data validation, and I want to make that a drop down between those two. Say we've selected budget. What we can do here is we can have the switch formula use directly this expression, and then say if this is budget, or we can type it in quotes, give me this. If it's actual, give me this. And this would still work just fine. I don't like doing that because as soon as you get like more options and a more complex model, this is much harder to trace just by looking at it than this, because here at least can easily identify which are the cells that contain the values. And if you have more options, you just get a long list of references here, or you need to have text in quotes. And if you have this formula in multiple places and you want to update something, it gets really tedious, but you can still do it. And you can only do this with the switch formula. With the choose formula, you need to use an index. That's why I prefer using the combo box, because it always gives me an index. And if I have to conform the model for users that are still on like Excel 2016 or even older, I can just use the choose formula and I don't have to switch the way the whole thing works behind the scenes. And those are the main formulas we'll be using. You probably noticed there's no VLOOKUP, no index match or XLOOKUP in here. The reason for that is that most often the complexity in a model comes from figuring out the links between different parts of the models and figuring out the model logic, and not from figuring out the technical aspect of how to build it. There are a lot of other formulas that might end up in a model, but I gotta say that those formulas plus the combo box functionality are probably 95 to 99% of what I use in my day-to-day modeling work. Now that you're more familiar with the formulas that we're gonna mostly rely on in our work, let's look at some Excel shortcuts that can really speed up our workflow. Before we start working on the actual model, there are a few shortcuts that I'm going to use quite a lot during the videos that you should be familiar with. Those range from the completely basic beginner ones to a bit more intermediate to advanced ones. So let's just go over them real quick and make sure that you're familiar with them so that it's much easier for you to follow along going forward. F2 allows us to edit a cell. But something else that F2 does, it allows you to change whether the arrow keys on your keyboard move your selector within the formula you're editing, or they allow you to change references. So what I mean by that, let's say here we say equal and we start moving with the arrow keys. It allows us to select a cell. Then you can say this minus, let's just grab another number. And now, if I want to change this minus to plus, I can't just move with the arrow keys. I have to use the mouse to select the minus and then change it to plus. And now you see that the arrow keys move the selection. But if I press F2 instead of the selection, they're going to move the cell. So if you look at the same example, we select this, write minus, and then we move and select this. I cannot go back, but if I press F2, it switches. You see that the dashed line disappeared. So now I can move within the cell itself and delete this and change it to a plus sign. The next thing is F5, which is GoTo, and specifically the special function of GoTo. Sometimes when we are working on a model, we can end up with some inputs and maybe we didn't remember to change the color of those. So they're black and I don't know what's what. You can use this numbers coloring, but in a lot of times you can just press F5, then go to special, And in special, you can select different things. So let's say I want to select constants and I want to select only the numbers. You can see that you can select blanks, you can select a whole region, array, objects, you can select formulas, and you can select what those formulas results are. So let's say if I select formulas and numbers and hit OK, it's going to select all the formulas that result in a number. And you see the years are selected here because they're linked to the years above. Once again, F5 special, and here we can just go to constant, numbers, select those and make sure that they're blue for inputs. Control page up and page down are really useful because if you hold control and you press page down, you go to the next tab, and if you press page up, you go to the previous tab. So that's a really easy way to navigate across your files. Next one is Control plus R or D, which is copy to the right or copy down. So what this would do is, let's say we don't have those years here, and I want to link this here to this one here, and then I want to copy it over to the side. So one way to do it would be to just copy, select everything and paste. But another way to do it is if we start the selection including this cell, then you can just hit Control R and it's going to copy this cell all the way to the right of your selection. Control D works in a similar way. Let's say here we have this formula for our revenue, which is a simple growth formula. You can drag it like that. You can copy it and paste it everywhere, or you can just select with the formula and press Control D, which is gonna copy it down. And this is especially helpful if we come in and let's say adjust a formula, say -5, select to the bottom, Control D, and it changes all the formulas in there. Control Enter is another useful one. So let's say we want to change this to 8%. We can change this one to 8%, then copy it and paste it everywhere else. Or what we can do is we can grab the whole selection, type in 8%, and then Control Enter would apply the same thing to the whole selection. And this also works with formulas. So let's say I'm gonna select all those and just say equals this multiplied by 2, Control Enter, and you see that on each row we have the respective revenue multiplied by 2. In terms of navigating our tabs, we can use a few combinations with Control, Shift, and the arrows. Let's say we're here. If I press Control and the right arrow, it's going to take me to the end of the filled area. On the other hand, if I'm up here and there's nothing after that, and I press Control down, it's going to take me to the next cell that's filled. And that's a really easy way to navigate across your tab. If we press Shift and use the arrows, we can make a selection. And most often we'll use those in combination. Let's say I want to select this whole thing here, Control Shift to the right, and it combines the effect of Control Right going to the end of the range and Shift selecting everything in between. The next one, let's actually look at this one first. So this is Control plus the plus sign and Control plus the minus sign. What those do is, let's say we have selected a whole row. If you press Control plus, and keep in mind that this is Control Shift equals if you have a small keyboard, or Control plus if you have a keyboard with the numpad, this is gonna add a new row above it. And the best part is that if, let's say, if you select 3 rows and you click Control plus, it's gonna add 3 rows above. Same way, Control minus deletes those, and this works both for rows and for columns, so Control plus and Control minus. If we move back now to Control space and Shift space, so those are really useful when we want to add or remove rows and columns, because instead of going here and selecting the whole row or going up here and selecting the whole column, no matter where we are, you can just press Shift space and it's going to select the whole row, and then you can do the Control plus or Control minus if you want to delete it. It's going to break the formulas here. Same way, no matter where we are, Control space would select the whole column. And the last one is using the Alt key with the ribbon. So a lot of commands are buried within the ribbon, and you probably end up using some of those quite a lot. What you can do is you can get in the habit of using the Alt key. If you press Alt, you see that each and every tab gets a letter to it. So let's say you want to go to the View tab, and you don't have to hold the Alt key. Just press W, you go to the View tab, and then you have all those letters next to all the options. So let's say we want to show the grid lines, VG, going to show the grid lines. Alt, W, VG is going to remove them. My experience shows that as long as you start getting into the habit of doing this with the Alt key, in a few days' time, the commands that you use most often will be stuck in your brain, and it's even going to be like muscle memory. Let's say I know that if I use Control space to select the whole column and I just press Alt-H-O-I, it's going to auto-fit to the column contents. And this is, again, Alt-H for the Home tab, O for Format, and I for auto-fit column width. The other really useful part about the Alt button is your quick access toolbar here. So those are commands that you can add here by, let's say, picking any command from the menu, right-clicking, and add to quick access toolbar. And now when I press Alt, those are numbers from 1. For me, it's almost like second nature when I type in a number and I want to format it, Alt-2. And if I don't want to have any digits after the decimal point, for me, Alt-3 is decrease decimal. And I just do it twice in quick succession and I have the number formatted. Another thing that I use a lot is the Format Painter. Grab those here, Alt-4, I have the formatting, and it's up here. And let's say I type 2020, and it's going to be formatted the same way. Those are the most common shortcuts that I use in my daily work, and I try to outline every time throughout the course when I do something with a shortcut. I try to outline it out loud so it's clear for everyone exactly what we're doing. But I think it's a great idea for you to be familiar with those shortcuts and get really comfortable using them, because this would help you tremendously in your day-to-day work and with the course content as well. Thank you for watching another part of the course. As soon as the next video is uploaded, you'll find it right here. By the way, if you can spare a minute, I would love to hear your thoughts on the course and whether it's living up to your expectations. If you're watching on the website, you can do so by the feedback button up there. And if you're watching on YouTube, just drop a comment down below. Thank you.